Alright folks, let's do this video on the election. Now, I don't normally do, this is my first kind of what I would call social, political, astrological video. I don't normally do these. I tend to prefer to stick to the more personal realm. But I said that I would do it, and I'm going to do it, and it couldn't be more nail-biting when I'm doing this. I haven't seen anything. I don't think any of the predictions or pundits kind of start to make their stuff till later today anyway. So I have carefully avoided anything internet related, and of course I'm recording this well before the election results are in. Blah blah blah. Let's dive into the highlights of 4 charts. The charts of the United States: Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris. I can't find Pence's birth time. A lot of this, of course, is dependent, especially with the individual charts, on the reliability of birth times that are available online. So if they're reliable, then these charts have weight. If they're not reliable, then alas, they don't. The biggest elephant in the room, of course, is the fact that Mercury goes direct today and is technically stationary. And Mercury is now direct. It went direct around 9:50 a.m. Pacific time. Sorry about the ambient noise, but I'm going to keep going. And Mercury going direct today is complicated. We would have preferred on the day that the election ballots were being cast and results were being calculated that Mercury would have speed and would be moving forward, because whatever comes out of today would feel more decisive and forward moving. In some ways, the days when Mercury is stationary, the day Mercury either goes retrograde or direct, are the days when the retrograde direct energies are felt the most. When Mercury went retrograde 3 weeks ago, yikes, when Mercury went retrograde 3 weeks ago, Comcast, Spectrum rather, my internet provider, we lost sort of wireless capability for a few hours. And then last night, my phone wouldn't log onto wireless, and anything I did to try to do that didn't work. And of course, when I just left it alone and woke up this morning, it was working by itself. So, you know, and so all that kind of good stuff continues on some level. Mercury retrograde stuff. So of course there are concerns and challenges around, will the technology work? Will there be technology snafus? Will the counting occur effectively? The bottom line is Mercury is now, at least when it comes to a lot of people hitting. There's also this thing about Mercury retrograde and Mercury direct, where there's almost a feeling of maybe while Mercury was retrograde, people were thinking of voting more in one direction, but today during election day, there's a greater chance that a majority vote in a slightly different direction since Mercury has changed signs. The bottom line is this, that there's every possibility that whatever occurs today isn't definitive. Now, it could be not definitive because ultimately as ballots are counted, things move in a different direction, or it could not be definitive because whatever occurs today is challenged in such a way that as Mercury gathers speed, it becomes more conclusive. So in many respects, today is a very tricky day from an election perspective, either because of technical snafus, counting errors, mathematical errors, cognitive errors, communication errors, technology errors, or the idea that whatever happens today has a somewhat stillborn quality, insofar as it does not arrive to us kicking and screaming and needs a little bit of time for the engines to rev up, either because as ballots come in, things go in a different direction, or because whatever gets declared today or becomes clearer today, if it is clear today, then it needs further validation, or it needs Mercury to gather speed for it to become more conclusive. There's also this idea of things being very close together, very tight together, or one candidate winning the popular vote, but the electoral college calculations being complicated. You know, these are the kinds of things that could make today very Mercury stationary, pranksty. You know, I'm giving you this result, but it's not going to be conclusive for all sorts of reasons, and then things have to occur and move forward in a certain direction. When it comes to the election results, man, this is truly the most, a nail-biting finish is what it is, because there's 2 ways to look at the charts that I mentioned. By far, out of the charts that I mentioned, leaving the United States chart aside from this, Donald Trump's is the most exciting and powerful chart right now. But exciting and powerful in what way? It's a chart that gains in visibility over the next 4 years. And certainly, had he dealt with certain aspects of his own self-undoing over the past couple of years, I would have said, had he tapped into the qualities of his North Node and his growth, visibly, I would have said that he was almost guaranteed an 8-year presidency. But because of where things are at in the second half of this year, everything is a little bit up in the air. The chart is very dramatically placed. His chart aligns with elections in such a way that the full moon in Taurus that occurs in November, October, November, is around election time. Taurus is his career house, full moon. We just had it 2 or 3 days ago. Now, 2016, the election results were practically on the day of the full moon in his career house. So that, this is something that's happened 3 days ago. Mercury's retrograde. There's this element of momentousness and in his chart at present. But there's also this feeling of which direction is it going to go in. What we do know for certain is that it's a chart that gains visibility over the next 4 years. He could gain visibility because he becomes president again, or he could gain visibility because he loses the presidency and he's still hitting the headlines in pretty dramatic ways over the next 3 or 4 years. There's fame and popularity, and then there's notoriety. Sometimes, interestingly, when eclipses start to move from the 12th house where his has been into the 11th and then into the 10th, sometimes even if a person passes away, it can propel a chart. A chart remains active even if a person crosses over to the other side. The chart still remains active. And in Trump's case, his health needs to continue to be monitored through the end of this year. If someone said to me, Avi, talk to me about the broad strokes of astrology, I would say the broad strokes of astrology indicate that Trump would be given another 4 years and we would all take to the streets as a nation in 2021 and 22. Saturn, when it came into Aquarius between March and the end of June, gave us things like the protests and the Black Lives Matter movement and a focus and an attention to certain types of social injustice. And it could be, and when Saturn moved back into Capricorn in July, I noticed a trend back into more conservative ideologies. So the charts and the gods could say, Avi, just look at the charts in very broad terms. Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto back in Capricorn moving direct. At the time of this election, we establish a more conservative holding on outcome so that the nation has to take to the streets to determine and reframe and reform itself through the lens of rational sort of social discourse, and everything has to be, we need a certain kind of resistance in order to reform. I personally don't really want to see that happen because I respect however people might be voting on this channel, but just in the interest of disclosure, I would want to see a Biden-Harris victory. Now, I want this place to be civil, and I'm going to look at the charts from the perspective of the charts themselves. But in broader terms, part of the narrative seems to have been giving you a heads up what Saturn in Aquarius is going to feel like in 2021 and 2022 with the protests back in conservative land. Trump's presidency is established. His moon conjuncts his north node later today. He's in the middle of a nodal return. There's enough to indicate with the full moon, there's enough to indicate permanence and greater strength, and we just look at the charts in very broad terms, and that's where we go. Biden's is the least interesting or volatile chart. It's a much more personal chart in terms of the development. Harris's is a very interesting chart right now as well. Harris's chart is placed in the same place roughly where Donald Trump's chart was placed 4 years ago. So does it mean or indicate that Harris is on some sort of 8-year trajectory of her own in a certain sense where she gets into office? I think the end of next year, 2021 and 2022, can be a challenging time for her, where certain things need to be dealt with, and there could be conspiracies, that could be behind the scenes stuff that she has to deal with. And in about 4 years' time, she's poised again to head in a more public direction. She too, interestingly, this year has gone through a nodal return, a reset, a reconnection with your sense of purpose. So Trump is going through that now. Trump's sense of purpose, however, a more subtle looking at the chart can present a different outcome. So the broad strokes outcome is everything is surprising. We had a full moon conjunct Uranus. Things are going in a different way than we were expecting. And all the pundits, all the psychics, all the intuitives, everyone is going Biden Harris, Biden Harris, Biden Harris. The chart and the gods are like, no, I'm much clearer and broadcast things in neon light brightness. Trump gets another 4 years, his chart becomes more visible. You guys take to the streets, social reform, conflict, heartache, redefinition over the next 4 years, but in a direction that is necessary and needed, and so Trump's presidency forms a certain kind of resistance to take things in that direction. A subtler reading of the chart is more intriguing. A subtler reading of the chart indicates that in Biden's case, a lot of his work and activity is in the area of self-esteem and self-worth and standing on his own 2 feet and trusting himself with the Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto conjunctions. And Joe Biden has a Sagittarius ascendant. The United States has a Sagittarius ascendant. Joe Biden and the United States had the same North Node placement. Same house, same sign. The priorities of the United States in terms of its development, broadly speaking, and Joe Biden are aligned. There's going to be a need as we move forward to focus on partnerships, legalities, contracts. Focus on the other person, the other party, other countries. Where are we aligning and setting up our priorities? Is it NATO? Is it somewhere else? Are we changing? Are we reframing? The new year for Joe Biden and the United States starts on November the 22nd, which means that while the sun is in Scorpio right now, this past weekend with the full moon is a very busy weekend for both charts, but there's a lot of behind-the-scenes activity going on so that all the work and the effort that has been put into place for the past 3 or 4 months can germinate on its own and results are delivered. And as we head towards November the 22nd, the new year begins for both the United States and Joe Biden, and we move forward. This chart, of course, aligns very well with the way election cycles are placed in the United States. I don't think that anybody, when they were placing an election cycle and said it'll be the first Tuesday in November, could have predicted that it would be happening on this 12th house preparatory axis to prepare for a new year starting November the 22nd, but that's how it's turned out as far as the United States chart is concerned. There's enough to indicate in Joe Biden's case that his development really stands with taking the limelight, building a sense of confidence in himself, focusing on taking on a greater leadership role. But the question is this the year in which he's going to do it? A subtler reading of the chart does set this up, but it also sets up both for the United States and for Joe Biden that whatever occurs over the next 2 months, there's also a dealing with behind-the-scenes activities and conspiracies and murky business. So if we end up in a place where Joe Biden does have a landslide victory today or a marginal victory today, it could very well be challenged. And it could be a challenge and a murkiness and a darkness that we continue to deal with over the next 2 months until there's the inauguration. In Biden's case, in Harris's case, if she loses the election today, no. In broad strokes, Trump wins the election. In a more subtler reading of the chart, Biden and Harris win the election. And Trump's visibility comes from, in Trump's chart, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction that happens December the 1st is in the 7th house of legalities, legal affairs, marriage, divorce, partnerships. All of these things are going to become important to him irrespective of what the outcome is. This idea of marriage, divorce, whether it's personal, whether it's public, whether it's legal affairs, whether, and a nodal return in Trump's chart and a moon returning to the North Node, in many ways the way Donald Trump has been behaving is not exactly aligned with his nodal placements. His nodal placements encourage less emphasis on stardom and star-like behavior and more in terms of humanitarian behavior and humanitarian leadership. Now, Trump supporters may feel that that is the direction that he's leaning in. I look at his behavior and I wonder about it. The other part of Trump's North Node placement encourages effective communication and listening to feedback around him and not getting too hung up on sort of a big picture view of the world and not communicating in broad strokes, but really being very, very present and cognizant of how he's coming across in terms of social media and how he's communicating Now, again, Trump supporters may say he uses this very effectively to galvanize whoever he's galvanizing. I look at the chart and go, I don't think that that's the kind of development that is encouraged for him. Let me start to bring this together. We are in the 15-minute mark. Whatever the results today, the strongest, most volatile, most powerful chart at play is Donald Trump's chart. And it will be a sort of spirit's intervention, judgment on his chart. Since the middle of 2018 till the end of this year, certainly from his perspective, he's had to deal with conspiracies, self-undoing, exposure. He may feel from where he sits that everyone's knives are out for his back. This continues till the end of this year. Starting about September 30, there's also something that's pulling him out into greater visibility and into the light. He's going to need and get help from his friends. But it's an open question as I look at his chart as to whether the direction that he moves in is towards greater popularity and greater visibility in a positive sense because he continues to be the leader of the free world, so to speak, and retains the presidency for 4 years, or whether losing the presidency and leaving kicking and screaming or kicking the door really strongly as he moves out means a 4-year tumble into the kind of issues and challenges that keep his name in the limelight enormously, with some sort of culmination to come 2 years from now. So being mired in social and political and group-like and political situations for the next couple of years, legal affairs for the next couple of years, only for judgments to start to be served to him by the end of next year and even beyond somehow. There's concern as far as health is concerned, but partnerships, contracts, legalities become an important part of this chart. Is there a possibility that he will win the election in broad strokes term? There is a possibility, and if he does, there's a larger purpose to it. And the purpose is one of protest and redrawing and redefinition in a social sense, with Jupiter and Saturn coming into Aquarius, conjoining on December the 21st, and setting up a good 2 years of people taking to the streets, and there being opposition and it not being a necessarily easy time. A subtler reading of the charts could indicate a Biden victory. Either it's hung, or as some people are predicting, some sort of a landslide, but the nation and Biden have to endure a certain amount of behind-the-scenes activities over the next couple of months. The nation's New Year and Biden's New Year starts on November the 22nd. Certainly by the time the New Year gets rolling, we're in a place where we can get rolling, and the social activism indicated by Saturn in Aquarius between March and June of this year shows up more in terms of the corrections that Biden puts in place to move things in a more rational place socially. Harris's chart, intriguing, is giving her an indication of where it is that she can shine since April of this year. She could become the vice president. I can't say that I entirely see Biden's chart indicating an 8-year presidency for him. It could be that the concerns about his health are genuine and real in some ways, and that in 4 years' time he is ready to pass the baton, maybe even potentially sooner. There's also the one thing that I have to mention with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in an election year, or the year of the inauguration, and this year it's in the election year on December the 21st, which is attacks on the president's life or health issues do come up, and depends on who we consider president. Certainly till that time Donald Trump is president, we've seen the COVID thing appear. The last 2 times this happened, it was not fatal and it was avoided. Prior to that, whenever this transit has occurred, it has had kind of a fatal impact or effect. So if Biden becomes president, this would be a horrible, horrible outcome. If Biden is nominated and some sort of an attempt is made on his life, what would it, I'm going to leave that out there with this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and let us just hope and pray that no one's life is going to be negatively impacted in horrible ways. If that doesn't help or serve anybody, and it's really not something to hope for, it is not something we could ignore astrologically. So, nail-biting finish. Donald Trump's chart is the one that holds all the cards. What sort of visibility does he get? What sort of strength does he get? How does his career, his popularity, or his notoriety, his ascendancy to some sort of grace or fall from grace in a very public manner show itself as we head to the end of this year and into next year? There are positives and greater visibility in the chart, and the chart is gaining strength. There's the fact that till the end of the year, there's still weakness in the chart, and karmic results may be delivered in a certain amount of self-undoing. There is the potential for a change in residence in the shorter term, where communication around whether he needs to change his residence and what needs to happen from a home, land, residence perspective gains in a short term, in a concentrated manner, becomes important for discussion in November and December. Does he stay or does he go? All of those indications are very present in the chart. Give me one sec. I'm still thinking. There's a real need in his chart. There's a real need. If he becomes president, there's a real need to align with his nodal placement, to give up the drama and to take on and move forward with a sense of humanitarian clarity and responsibility with regard to communication. It seems very unlikely that he will move in that direction. And he hasn't really moved in that direction so far. So is he going to be learning lessons, and is the universe going to dish out, is the universe going to be dishing out lessons to him, or is he going to be placed in a position where he's given one more chance to align with his North Node, and if he doesn't do it, it's going to end in a certain amount of notoriety. Irrespective, till the end of this year, the focus is still on job and health and routine and busyness and how to serve others, how to serve himself, but then a lot of emphasis of the next 2 or 3 years on partnerships, marriage, divorce, legal matters, joint resources, joint finances. If he loses, does he move countries? He's still got a share of legal stuff that he's going to have to deal with, and whether he's president or not, some of that is going to show up. It is a chart to be reckoned with right now. It is a chart that is gaining strength and fame and popularity. Broad strokes, he becomes president. We take to the streets and redefine. A subtler reading of the chart could mean that for Biden, the invitation has been to really come into his own power, which is a strong need in this chart. There's a tremendous alignment between his chart and the United States chart. New Year starts November 22nd. The new year really gets going as the new year starts, the calendar year 2021 starts. And we have a couple of months of murkiness and conspiracy and behind the scenes darkness that the United States and Biden have to deal with. Are the election results challenged? Do things get sent to the Supreme Court? Are there tantrums? Are things done while Trump is still president that hurt the nation in some ways? And then things get addressed once Biden becomes president. For Harris, whatever's happened this year and even next year is an indicator of where it is that her career can expand in 3 or 4 years' time. If she loses, she's going to have to deal with some stuff over the next couple of years, skeletons in her own closet, or things that distract her that she's going to have to deal with in order to emerge in about 3 or 4 years' time in such a way that she can make a bid for the presidency. If she wins, she's in, and she's got to deal with what she's got to deal with to move forward. Biden's health, when I think of his chart, I don't know that it's a shift in priorities. It's a shift in priorities. Sorry, but the drilling just started. It's a shift in priorities. I'm having a hard time seeing him as an 8-year president right now. I will leave it at that. I don't want to say more. To me, the 2016 election was much more decisive. But again, with Trump's chart, everything is so dramatic. It's just that Hillary Clinton's chart, I remember looking at the chart in the morning of the election and going, she's moving into a certain kind of retirement, is what I thought. She's to me, her chart, and she did. She really hasn't been that visible over the last 4 years. And Trump's full moon on that full moon day of the election was in his house of career. So I thought either it's going to be a dramatic loss or a dramatic victory. And it was a dramatic victory, partly because Clinton's own chart was not that strong. Trump's chart is the strongest most visible, most dramatic out of the three charts that I mentioned, but they are very intriguing. The Biden-Harris victory, if it occurs, will be because of a certain alignment with the nation's chart, and in Biden's case, it's a much quieter, much more personal thing. It's a much less dramatic thing than it is for Trump. It's much more about him. You know, it doesn't matter how old you are, your North Node is still working. It's about him really taking on the challenge and aligning with him learning how to take the limelight and him learning how to communicate to a broader group of people and stop playing in a local pond. And there's enough here in terms of alignment with regard to timing that makes me not banish him out of the picture. There's enough going on with Harris that makes me feel like I don't want to banish her out of the picture. There's enough that has emerged as far as Trump is concerned in what I would call self-undoing that makes me feel like there's a possibility that he could tumble and he could have a very visible next 4 years, very dramatic next 4 years, but maybe not so much in a leadership position. If he does win, we take to the streets. It's as if the universe has said, I've already shown you what Saturn in Aquarius is going to look like. I've already shown you what Saturn in Capricorn looks like. I've already told you where this is going. He's going to become president, more visible, take to the streets, redefine the country. A more subtle reading might mean, as I said, either the decision today is a little bit more hung, it's not decisive, but it could be moving in the right direction, and it becomes more decisive as the weeks go on. And we just have to deal with 2 weeks, 2 months of behind-the-scenes bullshit and conspiracy. Biden has to deal with it. The U.S. has to deal with it before we come through on the other side. If Trump wins, then the behind-the-scenes conspiracy could be to ensure a victory for him. There's enough in all three charts that can indicate if Biden loses, it could just be that he starts to focus on his own partnerships and he starts to play in a more local pond again. Even that's a possibility in the chart. This is a nail-biting finish. It's 27 minutes in. I've given you a couple of possibilities with a certain amount of context. I'm not going to call it. I've already called it in terms of broad strokes and subtler, more interesting terms. And I will leave it at that for now. If you found this video useful, feel free to share it. It's really being done more for my channel at this point in time. In a few hours, by the end of today, we'll know where things are at and how confusing they are and if it's a landslide or not and what we're headed for in the next couple of months. Whatever the outcome, we will hang in there. And while on the one hand, I personally, for me, seeing another 4 years of a Trump presidency it's going to be hard for me to handle. But at least from a broad strokes astrology perspective, I know what it is for. I don't think I'm going to lose heart. I'm going to have to brace myself for what it means. If there's a Biden-Harris victory, the next 2 months, 3 months are going to be, are going to have their share of, it's almost like the country and Biden are going to have to be swatting flies that are going to keep wanting to ruin the cake. And then we see where it is that we're headed. But it's unlikely that Biden's presidency will take on 8 years. And it'll be interesting to see if Harris is called on to take that weight on her shoulders before the 4 years are up, or even she makes a bid for it after that. If you found the video useful, feel free to share it, subscribe to my YouTube channel. This is the only one of my videos that is political in nature this overtly. I just tend to focus on the personal, and I enjoy that. Check out my other videos. Subscribe by all means. Click on the bell icon when you subscribe so you know when I'm doing new videos. My email address is in the description area, and so you can use that to contact me to inquire about rates for readings, or if you want me to make an easy-to-read version of your chart that shows you which sign is in which house and what that stands for, I can do that too. So, but check on rates first before you send me your birth date and birth time and all that kind of stuff. And I will leave it at that. I just finished a client reading earlier today, and for that particular client, if she makes it this far, it was interesting. We were talking about the election, and I just want to let her know that she shares the opposite North Node placement to Donald Trump's as far as she needing to lean into the Leo North Node. I can't believe I'm leaving this message for this person. But also what is interesting is she shares with Donald Trump the Gemini placement of the North Node. So it's opposite in one aspect, the Leo North Node, and the same in another aspect, the Gemini North Node. The need to listen, the need to communication, the need to be very present with regard to what is going on around you. The need to not be too bombastically aligned with, and I'm talking about Trump more here, a sense of one's bigger picture. Fascinating. After I got done with the reading and as I was preparing for this, I thought, oh, how strange that we talked about that election. But every time we were talking about the election in the reading today, at the end of it, there seemed to be a direct correlation between the chart I had read and the other charts that I was looking at. Biden has a Leo North Node. This is one other thing that is interesting in terms of Biden and Trump. Both their nodal placements are exactly the opposite of each other. Both of them. Both of them. They could both do with borrowing elements from each other. Fascinating. Anyway, more later, and it's past the 30-minute mark. I will leave you to it. Take care.